XOPA, campeones y compa. Welcome yet again to another story time with Cruz. Today, as I sit here and I refill my butane lighter, I'm reminded of the things that life often teaches us. The things that we put inside of our bodies. Usually, almost 100% of the time, will always lead to a great story. However, that being said, today's story takes me back to my first few months in pro wrestling training, and where I was already being broken into the style of cardiovascular training, the drills and rolls, all the conditioning exercises that it takes to become a pro wrestler. We were stretching and warming up in our usual manner. As this was going on, we see the door to the training facility open from the lobby. And in walks this massive individual of a man, a boy. He was around the age of 25. This man was horribly obese. And nothing against people that are horribly obese. But if you're going to enter pro wrestling, the number one thing you have to absolutely be before your tryout is at least in some bit of a working condition to be able to run, to roll, to do one push-up, even just a half a push-up. This gentleman clearly worked on his physique in a manner of just sitting and eating Cheetos and nachos, hot dogs, playing video games. Clearly this was eminent by the way he looked. This gentleman introduced himself like a perfect gentleman. He let us all know who he was. He let us all know exactly what his experience level was. Mind you, this at the time was the most renowned, worldly renowned Pro Wrestling Academy across the globe. The owner, the great 8-time world heavyweight champion, Harley Race, on the school. So, you can imagine the caliber of this training and the style and formats in which these workouts took place. No less the tryouts. The tryouts were something of a different nature. More times than not, when we saw a tryout come in, we never saw them return again the next day. In fact, 50% of those did not make it past the opening cardio drill. So, skipping ahead, this gentleman, this rather large, obese person, walked into the facility with his duffel bag. And he informs us who he is, why he is there, and that he has had no prior physical activity to stepping in those doors. He stretched out. We all introduced ourselves and we began our cardio. Going into this cardio, we could instantly hear his breathing become louder, almost as if he was being choked for air. So we start, as we usually do, with 20 jumping jacks. So we start at 20 jumping jacks. You hear his feet clapping on the floor from his heavy weights. So you hear his feet clapping on the floor, and you hear him sucking wind. He is completely sucking wind. And this is just the first 3 jumping jacks. So we get to 20 jumping jacks. Then we go into 20 push-ups. The push-ups absolutely killed him. He could not support his body weight with his arms. And not that he had slender, skinny arms. He had very dense, heavy arms. A typical heavy, obese person's arms. But they could not sustain the weight that was being forced. He just had too much mass. So his inverted shoulders allowed him to collapse. He spent a good amount of time trying to complete the push-ups. In fact, he spent so much time, we had to skip over push-ups to allow him to go into crunches. He was actually able to kind of do crunches. Then we go into a drill of mountain climbers. The mountain climbers, he has to hold himself up, and he's kicking his legs up and down as if he was climbing a mountain. We go 25 mountain climbers. He was able to get 5 because his knees were completely already swelling up from the blood flow rushing through his body. His body was just completely flooded with an excess amount of blood and vessels. And not that he looked at all vascular, but his knees began to bulge. And you could see almost his wrists and around his ankles start to puff up. And he was physically flush red. At that point, yes, our trainers had a good mind on them to stop somebody before something severe would happen. So the head trainer who was leading our cardio stopped him and asked him, "Are you sure you can continue? You're completely red. Catch a breather, go outside and get some water. Then come back in and we'll continue to the next drills." So he goes outside, he obeys, he has his hands above his head trying to get air, and we continue doing our regular paced cardio. So we continued the drills at our regular pace. He comes back in and he's still sipping water out of a little cup. He's sipping water and he's holding his side. He's drinking his water and he's kind of looking at the clock to see how much time has passed. Our head trainer asks him, "Are you ready to continue?" He shakes his head in a huge sigh and he puts his cup down, and then he kind of looks at the cup and he looks at the clock, and then he proceeds to walk towards the cardio area. So we're still on the floor doing our other drills, and we get to the point where we have to do 200 squats. No weight, no equipment on our backs, no sandbags, no balls, nothing, just body weight, 200 squats. To where you can feel the floor and you'd swipe your fingernails. Feel the floor and you'd swipe your fingernails across the floor as you're squatting. We demonstrate to him what he will have to do. The look on his face looked like he was watching his family die and being burned to death in front of him. It was so terrifying. We got no enjoyment out of watching him being terrified, but it was already past that point that we knew he was not going to make it through the drills. He was completely frustrated. He had never done anything prior to this. He attempted to do the squats, and yet I do commend him for trying. But what happened next, I really wish he had not showed up that day for training. He went into the 200 squats, and as soon as he comes down, he starts groaning. And we think, okay, well, his knees are killing him. That's normal. He's gonna have weak knees. He squats again. You see him holding his back, as if something's happening to his back. And I think, well, he's trying to keep his back straight. Maybe his back is tightening up. The third one, he's starting to grab onto him, so he grabs his quad with both hands. And he just lets out a groan. And it is the most shrill sound I had heard in my life at that point, because I never heard somebody in such pain from trying to push themselves up off their leg. He then grabbed his chest and he started circling around. And my head trainer, who was very nice about this, he tells him, "Please stop. You cannot continue. Look, you can try again tomorrow, because if you're cramping that bad, something is wrong with your body." This individual gets very, very offended. And his face changes and he's red and he puckers his lip. And he's mad and he's holding himself, almost as if our head trainer had patronized him. So he grabs himself, he grabs his chest and he's squeezing, and he starts just doing this very low, and he says, okay, and our head trainer tells him, "If you're going to do the squats, go lower. If not, don't even try to go past it." So he looks at him and he's disgusted and mad with him, and he's looking at him and he's holding his big ginormous chest, and he's there doing squats. He's trying to go lower. Well, as he's doing that, you can tell the cramps are coming back into his upper back, because he starts to turn his body. And as he turned his body, he said, our head trainer goes right in front of him, and he looks him in the eyes, and he tells him, he looks him wide-eyed, and he says, if you're going to do it, go all the way down. As he told this to him very boldly, this kid looks at him and squats down and drops his body all the way down, lower than he probably has ever been in his whole life. What happened next was completely horrible. He squeezed down and he gets stuck, and as he pushes himself, he screams. He's screaming, and his face is flush pink and red, as the back of his neck and his ears are completely red, and his pale skin has just blood all the way. And he screams and he drops back down and he falls to his side. He falls to his side, and you can see his crack of his ass was exposed. He begins to let out everything. He throws the biggest fart I had ever witnessed, because you could physically see clapping and wind, but it did not end there. You hear a sound of something slosh through the wedge of his ass, and he began to defecate around the surrounding area of where he was laying. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the word defecate, he basically, from forcing himself to squat that low, collapsed, and he proceeded to shit himself. So, the stench from this area became just completely unbearable. We all stopped. In fact, no one even laughed. Nobody had a smile on their face. Everyone was in disgust. We watched him. I was 3 people down from him, and I looked, and just the image of this flood coming out from underneath him was disgusting, and the smell. We used to have this door with a giant wall covering of pro wrestler Batista. Our head trainer grabs it and just throws the door up. You just see Batista's body just curl up. This was disgusting. This person was in no way whatsoever were we at all making fun of this individual. We all left the training portion of the building and waited in the lobby. About 20 minutes later, this kid comes out. He looks completely flush, completely humbled and embarrassed by what has just transpired in there. He apologizes to all of us. Our head trainer runs to the supply closet and grabs a bottle of bleach, grabs the mop and bucket, and then he gives this kid a bunch of rags to go clean his own mess. He cleaned it up. Training was ultimately canceled for the day after that incident, and we changed out of our workout clothes, went our individual ways back home. But as he was leaving, he went around and shook everyone's hand. Of course, after he washed his hands, he went around, shook everybody's hands, apologized yet again for the incident, and he spoke to our head trainer for a little more in depth about what had just happened. As I was walking by, I caught him explaining to our head trainer that upon that day, he had gone and purchased a over-the-counter fat burner from Walmart, and he had popped over the span of 5 hours. He had popped a fat burner every hour, leading up into this tryout. And right before he walked into the facility, he had chugged a 20-ounce Mountain Dew. So the result of what happened was because of these 5 fat burners in his body and the carbonation from his Mountain Dew that he chugged. This poor individual had no clue of what he was putting in his body. He had no idea of what would result as an effect of him combining these 2 elements. But no less, it was him combining those 2 things that made him shit himself in front of everyone, and ultimately canceling practice for all of us. It didn't ruin it, but it did definitely end it. But unfortunately for him, Harley Race was not there watching us that day. He was out of town at a signing. And fortunately for this kid, Harley was not there to witness this. And unfortunately for us, Harley was not there to witness this, because I can only imagine what Harley's face and eyes would have looked like watching this poor soul shit all over the floor of the Harley Race Wrestling Academy. I can only imagine him telling this kid, "Well, kid, you already shit yourself and let it all out of you. You might as well finish your 200 squats." Something to that effect. But no less, in the first time that had happened, it definitely was not the last time that somebody would emit bodily fluids on the floor of that facility. That is it for now. Que chucha. Stay classy.